Hi guys, today I'm going to show you step by step how to paint these beautiful dreamy loose flowers in a sunlit fairytale summer. These are the main tools I'm using for this painting, and you can also check out the description section for more information. Firstly, I'm washing the whole page. You can wet the paper generously, but be careful not to let the surface water pool overflow. After it's thoroughly white, I'm loading some Cadmiun yellow medium hue from Daniel Smith to the brush and dabbing the color here and there onto the paper. And then I'm rinsing the color off the brush and loading some Quinacridone permanent rose from Mijello. Then I'm directly painting on the white paper. At this stage, the paper is very wet, so we don't have to worry too much about water control. If your colors aren't spreading much and seem a bit patchy rather than blending smoothly, you can use the same brush to gently help blend them. Just be careful not to overwork the area. When you want to soften harsh edges, focus only on the spots where there are obvious boundaries between colors. Avoid brushing over the entire page. Next, I'm adding some sap green from A.agallo and dabbing this color here and there around the page, mostly focusing on some remaining blank spots. I avoid overlapping too much with the existing colors on the page. This is the third color I'm adding to the white paper. You can also soften it by diluting the paint on your brush. Next, I'm adding some olive green from A.agallo to the bottom of the page first. Since this will be a dark area in the final result, make sure it's not overly diluted. And then without reloading, I'm dabbing it around the top areas to add a slightly muted hue. You can also dip the brush a little, but make sure not adding too much water, as too much water may push other colors on paper away. I'm intentionally adding a bit of water in the middle area of the paper. This is a section I worked on lights in the previous steps, so just in case it starts to dry out, I'm slightly dabbing in some water. The key is that I know the areas with more pigments are still wet enough on paper, so adding water here won't cause obvious backgrounds. Just remember to adjust the amount of water you add depending on your specific situation. And then I'm adding the dark forest paint from the same palette for some more depth at the bottom of the page. Now I'm using a clean white brush again to soften the harsh edges of the green I just added. Next, I'm adding some Quinacridone permanent rose again from Mijello, forming it into rough, roundish, flower-like shapes. I'm adding some white ink onto the page now. I use a thin brush to load the ink and then dip it in water quickly, and then dab here and there. As we can see here, the ink is able to spread like this, which is the ideal consistency. We can also slightly adjust the shape of the white ink blotches if we want. As it's still wet, erasing or refining them won't cause anything to turn out looking unnatural. White ink is different from watercolor, so unlike two watercolor paints mixing together, white ink tends to show clear boundaries instead of blending smoothly once it dries. Also, the final results can shrink a bit after the paper is dry, so it's best to paint it slightly larger than the size you expect. The white ink area is almost dry now, and as you can see here, the final shape resembles a splash of paint. Now I'm adding some earthy green to the bottom area. When the paper is getting a little drier than before, I'm adding some thicker grain to strengthen the depths at the top and bottom. Keep in mind that we don't want to add any very thick or very diluted color. Too thick will cause the paint to look unnatural with harsh boundaries. Too watery may create unwanted blotches and won't help with adding depth. We can start with the smaller area and then use a clean and slightly damp brush to soften the edges. This way, the color added will create a sense of depth without merging too much in the background, but still blending in sufficiently to not stand too much or feel too sharp. Now I'm waiting it to be 100% dry. I'm loading some white ink again to paint the foreground flowers. I highly recommend using a smaller brush here, and if you're unsure about the flower shapes, start small, and you can always refine as you go if something doesn't look right. This is the original consistency of the ink. I didn't add extra water, so it appears very opaque and is able to cover the background that's underneath. I'm painting the flowers using this brush, and we can try to vary the direction of the flowers like this. And next, I'm adding some Quinacridone permanent rose again to the white flowers. The effect I want to achieve is a mix of two colors, red and white, with them coming together to add a little pink in parts. This white ink I'm using dries out fast, so I'm adding some more white ink when I dab this reddish color. This helps the two colors feel like they belong to the same flower rather than looking separate and stiff. Now I'm using a fine brush from Black Velvet to paint the stems with the dark green. I'm also adding some abstract roundabouts as decorative elements around the flowers, and don't forget to vary their sizes for more visual interest. I'm now using white ink again to add some very small dots in the background.